This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Welcome to Teacher Talk Radio, the podcast that brings you inspiring conversations with educators from around the world. I'm your host, James Radburn, and this is The Late Show. Today's episode, we have two special guests who will try and answer the question, what should you do during your first 100 days as head?
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Wow, what a wonderful sunny day it's been today. Now, I am very excited about tonight's show. We've got two special guests that I'm very excited to talk about. One of them is Emily, who tweeted at the end of the last year, I know we don't do it for them, but to turn the school around from RI to good over these past few years, despite the challenges, needs to be celebrated. What an amazing school. What a brilliant team and a fantastic children and family supportive community. Couldn't be prouder. And we're going to listen to her in a little bit, just talking about that journey that she's been on and how they have transformed that school, how you brought those staff, family, community and children on board to see your vision and implement it as well. And I know they've been shortlisted for the TES Schools Award. And then following that, we've also got Mark Unwin, who's the CEO of Create Partnership Trust. With over 2,600 children and 270 staff in Birmingham. And he started in September. And his career is rich, bright. It's been a huge array of jobs that he has done as well. And it's going to be a fantastic way to get involved and be part of as well. So we're looking really forward to getting those two on board with tonight's show. So without further ado, let's listen to the news for this week while Emily gets on board and listens to our show.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC reported on the high cost of school uniforms. Whilst this is nothing new, the current cost of living crisis has brought the issue back into focus. The charity, the Children's Society, claims in the report that parents are spending an average of £422 a year on secondary and £287 on primary uniforms. This is despite rules that were meant to lower the cost. The government commented that it was working to ensure uniform costs are reasonable. The BBC reports that some parents have said that they are having to choose between uniforms and holidays because prices have increased. The Children's Society said it had polled 2,000 parents across the UK and found that parents could be paying an average of £75 for coats and bags, an average of £63 for sports clothing, and around £62 for school shoes. Under changes to the Education Act last year, schools in England are meant to be helping cut costs for parents. However, the Children's Society found pupils were still expected to have 3 to 5 branded items as part of uniform. Whilst many schools now offer pre-loved uniform to struggling families, parents and charities continue to say that more must be done. FE Week reports on the new NHS workforce plan, calling it a fantastic opportunity for the FE sector. In an opinion piece by Robert Halfon, the plan is claimed to put apprenticeships and skills training at the heart of the NHS workforce strategy. The FE sector already offers training for apprenticeships in a range of core healthcare roles, such as dental nurse, healthcare support worker and pharmacy technician. But the new plan seeks to broaden the range and routes into working for the NHS. The government has announced £40 million of funding over the next 2 years to help eligible providers expand degree apprenticeships. £48 million of funding is also backing the higher technical qualification in healthcare roles. The BBC features concerns about the number of nurseries closing in England, after more than 400 closed in the last year. The sector is blaming chronic underfunding and rising costs. The National Day Nurseries Association said the data raised serious questions about whether there would be enough places to deliver the government's promised expansion of free childcare. In the year to the end of March, the number of nurseries fell from 27,291 to 26,884, with the overall number of places dropping by 3,512. When childminders were included, the overall number of childcare places fell by 24,521. In March's budget, the Chancellor announced the extension of the current scheme, offering some families in England 30 free hours of childcare per week for 3 to 4-year-olds to cover younger children. The change would be phased in from April next year. Nurseries say the amount of government payment does not cover costs, leading to closures for some businesses. A Department of Education spokesperson said that the picture was broadly positive, as the decrease in places was only 2% on last year, although it was recognised that there are some local challenges. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week I'm going to talk VPN. For those of you thinking, why is Steve talking about an underwear fashion faux pas? A VPN is a virtual private network, and knowing a little bit about them might make you realise you actually need one. What is it? Well, in a nutshell, a VPN changes how internet data is transmitted from a device. It allows the user to be more hidden. I know what you're thinking. I'm no cyber criminal. Why do I want to conceal my data? Well, let's look at 3 things a VPN can do for you. I'm going to use a phone as an example, but all of these can be applied to any device you can put on the internet. Do you use public networks? A public network may be the Wi-Fi on the bus or train, a local coffee shop or fast food restaurant, any connection that isn't your home. Transmitting data on these networks can potentially allow your data to be intercepted by third parties. Having a VPN allows you to encrypt your data from your device rather than depending on the network you're connecting to. So, when surfing the web while enjoying a burger and fries, you can be confident if you're being intercepted, the data will be useless to the interceptor. The next is shopping online. When connecting to an online shop, some stores use your location and unique device ID to target you. If you're returning to look at a product, the likelihood is you're going to buy it. Knowing this, some stores use clever algorithms to increase the price to maximize their profit. With a VPN, you can mask this data so the price you see is the initial price. The third is some streaming services are blocked by internet providers or unavailable from outside of certain countries. If you're using a VPN, you can choose where to set your location to allow you to see the content you wish to stream. I've not looked at individual providers. Some are free, some are paid for. If you're unsure, find a friend who's using one, ask them about it, and use the same one as them to begin with. Then you get free tech support. Make sure you know the terms of service. You don't want the VPN you're using keeping your data, as that would defeat the object in the first place. As always, don't forget to check out the TT Radio Twitter feed. Tell us what you want to know about tech. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
This programme has been brought to you by the Happy Confident Company. Our clinically approved, ready-to-go wellbeing and mental health programme will help your pupils thrive. In only 10 minutes a day, you'll be able to deliver social and emotional learning and wellbeing tools throughout your school. To find out more, visit us at www.happyconfident.com.
Welcome this afternoon, Mark. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you. Good. The sun's out, isn't it, up there? It's looking good.
It is. Just saying, I'm on the mezzanine level at the Birmingham Library building, which for anybody that's been to Birmingham, is the iconic building with the gold what looks like gold metal foil funnel on the top of it, looking out on Library Square. And yeah, it's beautiful. The sun's reflecting off the pool thing. There's children running around in bare feet, getting cooling off in the sun. It's lovely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Now, today's topic's all about that head start, navigating your first 100 days as head, and particularly in your role as a trust CEO, it's going to be really interesting to get your fascinating insight into what you've learned and actually what you've seen of your colleagues do in schools, and what works effectively and not so effectively from your perspective as well. But I always want to go back to you. So can you introduce yourself to everyone, and then tell us about your journey through education and how you got to where you are now?
Yep, certainly. So I'm Mark Unwin. I'm the very proud CEO of Create Partnership Trust. We have just shy of 3,000 children in 4 amazing schools, primary schools in Birmingham, serving very deprived communities in Spark Hill, Sparkbrook, Hockley and Hodge Hill. So I've been in teaching now for about as long as I wasn't in teaching. So I came from outside education initially, started working for Ralph Lauren when I left university, selling clothes, which if the pay was better, I may well still be doing. And then I had a brief stint with AstraZeneca, and then I went to work in a very small mobile phone shop, which 3 years later was listed on the alternative investment market, which is attached to the London Stock Exchange, and was the biggest Orange dealer in the country. So we sold more Orange phones than anybody else in the country. And I was the business manager for them. So I used to run all the B2B side of that. So I was about 25. And then I went to be the European product director for the world's biggest distributor of mobile phones, which is out of Houston, and then started trading electronics. So I spent about 15 years in total before becoming a teacher, involved in the trading of electronics in some way, shape or form. And initially that started off with mobile phones, but very quickly became handheld computers and laptops and other electronic items, all sorts of different things. Working across Europe, absolutely loved it, and had a fantastic time. And then towards the end of that, when I was about 32, the electronics business started to flatten out, and I was looking for other opportunities and something else that I might want to do for the next stage of my career. And I was sat in Duke's 92 pub in Castlefield in Manchester, and we were talking about what you'd do if you won the lottery. And I said that I'd like to do something that had a bit of moral purpose about it, and I'd like to do something that that was pretty absorbing. And a friend of mine, a girl called Kate, who was a year 3 teacher at a school in Stalybridge, just outside Manchester, offered me the opportunity to go in and spend the morning with her. And she said that if I wanted to leave at lunchtime, then all I had to do was buy her lunch. And it was in the days when school teams, teachers, and head teacher, deputy head teacher all used to go to Wetherspoons at lunchtime on a Friday for Curry Friday, and even drink beer. And the bet was that if I wanted to leave at lunchtime, the deal was if I wanted to leave at lunchtime, then I had to buy Kate her curry, her Friday afternoon curry in Wetherspoons. And I never left. I stayed for the rest of the day, and she bought her own curry. I think she bought mine or something. And then I went back the next week to volunteer for a bit. And then I went back to do a BGCE. And then I actually got a job there. So I worked there for 2 years as an NQT. And then as the maths leader, introducing the National Numeracy Strategy in the second year that I was there. And then I went to London. And so I spent 8 years leading schools in London, in Camden, and then in Archway, one in Hampstead, which is super privileged community and a wonderful experience. and then a school in Archway, and then for 3.5 years as the deputy, and then the acting head of a school called St Gabriel's, which is on the Churchill Gardens estate in Westminster, and then wanted a headship. And I'm from up north. I was born and raised in Manchester, and I came back up north, and I was the head of what was Wilmslow Grange Primary School and is now Hamforth Grange Primary School. I was head there for initially 4 years just as the head, and then a guy I know, Tom Quinn, and myself set up a trust called the Frank Field Education Trust, based out of Liverpool, for now Lord Field of Birkenhead, which had a vision for social justice through excellence in education. And I was there for, we set that up, and that's been going now from, I think, January 2020 all the way through the pandemic. And then I was running a trust in Stoke last year as something for the DFE. And then I took over at Create in September. So I've done the whole gamut in 15 years, from teacher, subject leader, senior leader, head, acting head, executive head, school improvement partner, deputy CEO, and now CEO. So it's been amazing.
Yeah, I was going to say a very diverse set of jobs you've had there. Kind of want to go back to that 15 years you had before education. What's something you've learned there that's helped you as a leader in education? Because a lot of the ECTs and PGCs I work with have always been in education. And I think from where I work, and I work sometimes with the central team and looking at the digital side across our trust, we can learn things from business. And our schools aren't businesses, but in some ways we've got to run them like businesses and be efficient. So what's been your takeaway from that side of the world that's transformed you?
Yeah, huge takeaways, and actually enormous crossovers. And I feel really privileged to have done it. And so I suppose 3 things I would say. One that's really practical, and this is such a shame, I think, for schools. But the company based out of Houston that I worked for was I think at the time it was about a $7 billion company in terms of turnover. Huge organization in terms of the amount of money it made. And they really invested in their staff. And one of the big investments they made was in terms of the organization of your own personal organization. So anybody that knows me knows the way that I sort of organize myself. And it goes back to some training I had when I was about 24 with a company out of Sweden called Time System. And those that are long in the tooth like me remember these very, very expensive filofax. It's essentially a filofax with these little concentric squares on the front. And this was in business at the time. That was a sort of mark that somebody had invested some time in your CPD. And it was amazing. The quality of the training, I can still remember most of the training I had. I think it was 4 days long, and it was primarily just to do with how you organize yourself, how you organize your team, how you delegate, and how you record all that, and how you keep on top of a huge task list. And I still use it today. So I've thinned it down now, and out of the planner that I use, it's exactly the same system that I used then. So I think that's fascinating. And so many teachers, especially young teachers and ECTs, it would be so good to be able to invest in their organization, because it has a massive positive knock-on effect in terms of my well-being. So in terms of my well-being, once I became a teacher, I didn't really used to take a huge amount home, but it wasn't because I wasn't doing it. It was primarily because the organizational structures that I've got allow me to do it in the time that I've got to do it, and also to an extent allow me to put it to one side and then leave it and come back to it as well. So I think that was a massive takeaway. The second thing is, maybe the second and third thing are linked together, but the second thing was that particularly the company out of America had and actually all of them, especially because they were new embryonic companies, they were very entrepreneurial. They had very, very, very flat leadership structures. So there was no barrier between somebody that worked in the warehouse, or somebody that worked on one of the sales teams, or somebody that worked on one of the finance teams, and the MD, and being able to have access to leaders at any time of the day, and being able to be on the same level as, talk to, and have relationships with people that were running, massive multinational organizations. That really stuck with me, that actually having an open door policy, making sure that there's no barriers, there's no hierarchy as much as possible, that everything's a network. That was a huge takeaway. And I think the third, and I've talked about this on Twitter a lot, and sometimes, it's not always, I don't know, everybody doesn't share the same opinion, but it comes from that time, is the importance of giving power, and I mean real power, to people that need that power, irrespective of how young or inexperienced they are, and trusting people to do the job that they're able to do. And what I mean by that is we're based out of a business unit in Trafford Park in Manchester, near Old Trafford. And I think at one point we were the most productive company in the UK, because we turned over £450 million, and there was only 42 of us in the building. And that was because at 25 or 26, I had a line sign off of about £2 million. And the age wasn't a barrier at all. The fact that in another company, I wouldn't even have been off the sales team. But if you were good enough, you were old enough, and they trusted people to do the job. And I've always tried to do that in teaching. And I know that's not everybody's view. And in secondary, I know that's definitely not everybody's view. But certainly in primary, I think that there's real power in spotting talent early and giving people the opportunity to experience a sense of authority, to experience making mistakes, and experience of taking some risks, and particularly an experience of making whole school change, irrespective of how old you are or how experienced you are. And I think, we really try and do that. I do think it's easier at primary than secondary, but those are the three things I would say I probably took away from it. There's probably loads more, actually, but those are the three I can think of.
And I think, going back to your point about that flat leadership and the open door policy, I've seen schools where the leadership then is bombarded by all those things. So if you counteract that by giving the power to the people who need it, you actually you've got your principles then. You go back to what are your principles, a good leadership, and what I want my school to be. What's that culture? And actually people can take ownership. And if they don't get it right, that's fine. We will work way through it and do that. So going back,
and that's part of the culture, isn't it? That people aren't, that there's no fear of failure there as well. I think business does that largely really well, especially businesses that are set up to make a lot of money. They largely do that well because they understand that there will be failures as well as there'll be successes. That that's part of the process. Sometimes in education we lose sight of that because of our moral purpose, don't we? We lose sight of the fact that you're going to have nearly as many things go wrong as things go right. But as long as you learn from that and you develop over time, then that's okay.
Yeah, and it makes me think about, these are the things we've always done it this way, and actually it's challenging that as a core thing.
Yes.
So take that back, so you've been in all of these roles. So imagine you're new to headship, or you're going to a new head, and you may have some prior experience. How then do you kind of go and assess those strengths and weaknesses of that new school? And then what's that balance between watching and then enacting and making changes? Because I always find that's quite a difficult one. And I've seen successes, I've seen failures, but I've also seen conversations about the pressures of Ofsted as well, in terms of that balancing that. So what are your thoughts in that regard?
And I think the thing it makes me think of initially is the different structures of trusts and actually what roles you're undertaking when you go in and do that watching piece, or that, because it's very different in different roles, isn't it? So, quite often get asked, if you're new to headship, for instance, what should you be doing in your first 100 days? And I always say, as little as possible or nothing, and ideally nothing, because actually the temptation is always to make change in order to appear busy, or to appear, to be making a difference or earning your money. And actually that often isn't the right way to behave. And actually, it's only with time and a bit of wisdom and experience that you understand that actually that 50 days in particular, the first 50 days won't actually make the great big massive huge difference that you think it's going to make. And that's something I've had to my acting headship came at a strange time for the school. It had gone from outstanding to special measures, and similarly, one of the schools I took over earlier in my career, there was a real driving pressure probably from Ofsted, from the governing body and others, to basically make changes quite rapidly, local authority to make changes quite rapidly. But I think as the longer I've done this now, the more it's worthwhile resisting that temptation. And I personally always use a 50 working day rule, and that's the same. But the last 3 trusts I've been at is, if you sit and watch for 50 working days, 10 working weeks in, you've got a picture of what's what can be changed. And during that period of time, it's absolutely about meeting everybody, and it's about listening. And increasingly now, I think it's about meeting everybody and listening. And I really, somebody that I value hugely, Dame Frances Cairncross, who was one of the directors at FET, who's an absolute inspiration. She was absolutely clear that, the more of that can be done over food or in a social setting, actually it's 3 or 4 or 5 times more valuable to do it that way. People relax and people tell you what you need to know, and a more convivial setting. So increasingly that sort of thing, watching, listening, building relationships, and really trying to participate in some active listening, and ideally trying to participate in some active listening over a couple of deals and food, where people feel in a more relaxed setting, because we don't always appreciate, do we, the perception that other people have of us. And whilst we think that we're not threatening and collegiate, by the nature of the fact that you're in there, that's not always the case, and you have to be appreciative of that. So I suppose the first thing is, it depends what you're doing. So if you're a new head, that's very different than if you're going in as a school improvement partner. He's very different if you're going in as an executive head. He's very different if you're going in some sort of capacity at trust level, or as a CEO, I suppose, as well. So, and I'm probably not going to go into each of the details of it, but it is very different. The one thing I would say is, I think you've got to have some really strong guiding principles that are transferable from school to school. And we talk about this a lot at Create. So Create, when I joined in September, really strong foundations as trust. Trust been going from 2016, was left a really, strong foundations by the former CEO. And in terms of the financial structure, in terms of the central team, who I love, in terms of the leadership teams of all the 4 schools, are absolutely brilliant. So, really positive position in that respect. And I think that but the trust had formed out of a school, and so many trusts, don't they, form out of, and your listeners can't see this, but I keep making this sort of steeple shape with my hand, where, you'll get basically almost like the educational firmament, and then one school sort of rises out of the firmament by virtue of good leadership or great results, or because it does something a little bit differently from others, and then that gets backed in some way, shape or form. It might be through London Challenge or Birmingham Challenge, or it might be through having a charismatic leader, or it might be through the DFE signposting people to it, and it raises up a little bit further. And then it might become a teaching school or a teaching school hub, or it might be recognised in some way nationally. And then it enters into some sort of partnership or federation arrangement or support arrangement with another school, and they fall into this trust structure underneath the first school. And then it becomes a multi-academy trust, and then other schools come in alongside that. And I think that's very natural. But as a second generation CEO, who doesn't have that baggage, who doesn't have that relationship over time, that sees things in a different light by virtue of the fact that I wasn't involved in the process of setting it up, I think there's a real opportunity there for trust to become something completely different. And at Create, we've really pivoted that structure, flattened it back out, and said that the trust is the foundation on which great leaders can build great schools. And I think that I passionately believe that great leaders do make great schools, but I think sometimes the nature of trusts can stymie that, or they can do the opposite to what the effect it's trying to have, because it removes agency from the very people that you want to have agency. And if you go back to my analogy about the or the story about the electronics company in Houston, their whole mission was to give that agency to the people that needed that agency and devolve that power to the people that needed that power to have the most effect. Well, that's the same in schools, isn't it? And too often trust structures remove that agency from their head teachers. But there needs to be quality assurance, and there needs to be a solid view of how things are going. And I would say that solid view, you need to have that quality assurance for governance, but you also need to have it so that you can put in place really effective support to actually help the school, rather than within a trust structure whereby you're doing that in some sort of punitive way. I think there's a way of doing it. I think at Create we're showing there's a way of doing it, which is actually in a really, really supportive way, so we can get out of the way as quickly as possible, but we can help in the interim period. And I think the only way you can do that is by having a set of guiding principles that are agnostic of approach. And what I mean by that, so for instance, you might have a set of guiding principles around phonics, for instance, that is just around fidelity to the chosen phonics scheme, rather than having an approach which says across a multi-academy trust, for instance, that everybody has to have the same phonics scheme. And at Create, 3 of our schools use read writing. One uses Little Wandle by virtue of the fact that they were part of a teaching hub. And I don't think there's any tension there, because if you have a set of guiding principles around fidelity to the phonics program, training for the staff on phonics, ensuring that the outcomes are great, making sure that the experience that the children have in their phonics programs really support, and making sure that the interventions are appropriate, and all those sort of things, then if you've got a set of guiding principles that are agnostic of a particular approach, then I think it's far, far more powerful. So as you know, my passion is around curriculum development. And I've got a set of guiding principles around curriculum development that I like. That I don't really care whether you're using Cornerstones or you're using Focus or you're using something that you've done yourself or something that's just a load of schemes stitched together. It doesn't really matter. It's about, have you got a really clear sequence in place that is reflective of the actual amount of time that you've got to teach in? Is there a really well-defined body of knowledge that you're trying to teach? Is there has that body of knowledge been sequenced into the particular lessons that you're going to teach? Are you really clear to the teachers on the ground exactly what they're supposed to be teaching in the lesson and what the children are supposed to be knowing at the end of it? As the school, if it's got an approach towards being vocabulary rich, has it done the same for vocabulary to make sure that that children are getting a strong background in vocabulary to help them for the rest of their life? And then, is there a suggestion in terms of how the teacher might teach that, but is there also freedom and flexibility to teach it in a different way, because the outcome is the important thing? And is there some sort of assessment for learning going on so that the teacher knows whether all the children have learned that body of knowledge at the end of each lesson and over time? Is there overlearning in place so that they don't forget it over time? And is there appropriate CPD for the staff and coaching for the subject leaders or subject champions to ensure that they're able to verbalize that? And is there a quality assurance system in place to underpin the whole thing to make sure it works? Well, you can do that because I've got that set of guiding principles in my head, or I've actually got a computer. But if you've got those set of guiding principles, then it doesn't matter if you're using Cornerstones or Focus, or you're using something that you've knocked together out for 15 different things, or something you've written yourself, or a load of schemes, because you're working at a level above that and saying, this is what best practice looks like. Are all those elements in place? And if they're not in place, which bits of them do we need to do a bit of work on in order to put them in place? And I think too often in education, we get sucked into the favoured approach. And that can be the whole traditional progressive thing as well. Is as a teacher, you're quite good, aren't you? So you come out of the firmament of being a teacher, and somebody recognises your talent, so you go up. So this is the same as the trust structure, isn't it? So you get promoted, and you might get on a podcast, or you get asked to write a blog, or you become famous on Twitter or whatever, and then your reputation goes up and you earn more money, and you end up in a situation where you're judging other people in some way, or quality assurance other people's work. And you have to divorce yourself from the things that made you successful as a teacher in the first place. And that takes a load of time. I do think that's the bit that takes time and takes wisdom and time and takes experience, because it's really, really difficult not to think, well, I would do it like that. And that's the work for me. That's the worst sort of quality assurance. Quality assurance has to be completely subjective and not at all objective.
Yeah, and it resonates with a lot of work I've been doing across our trust in terms of digital education at the moment, because I go back to what are those principles of good teaching and learning, and this is the right thing for the right time now. But it goes back to one of your points earlier you made, it's given power. They know what those principles are of what good teaching and learning is. Those leaders do. You're talking the same language, you're building something together. And things change, things evolve, new research comes out, but actually those principles will adapt slightly, but actually the approaches you do to them, so it resonates heavily with me.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC reported on the high cost of school uniforms. Whilst this is nothing new, the current cost of living crisis has brought the issue back into focus. The charity, the Children's Society, claims in the report that parents are spending an average of £422 a year on secondary and £287 on primary uniforms. This is despite rules that were meant to lower the cost. The government commented that it was working to ensure uniform costs are reasonable. The BBC reports that some parents have said that they are having to choose between uniforms and holidays because prices have increased. The Children's Society said it had polled 2,000 parents across the UK and found that parents could be paying an average of £75 for coats and bags, an average of £63 for sports clothing, and around £62 for school shoes. Under changes to the Education Act last year, schools in England are meant to be helping cut costs for parents. However, the Children's Society found pupils were still expected to have 3 to 5 branded items as part of uniform. Whilst many schools now offer pre-loved uniform to struggling families, parents and charities continue to say that more must be done. FE Week reports on the new NHS workforce plan, calling it a fantastic opportunity for the FE sector. In an opinion piece by Robert Halfon, the plan is claimed to put apprenticeships and skills training at the heart of the NHS workforce strategy. The FE sector already offers training for apprenticeships in a range of core healthcare roles, such as dental nurse, healthcare support worker and pharmacy technician. But the new plan seeks to broaden the range and routes into working for the NHS. The government has announced £40 million of funding over the next 2 years to help eligible providers expand degree apprenticeships. £48 million of funding is also backing the higher technical qualification in healthcare roles. The BBC features concerns about the number of nurseries closing in England, after more than 400 closed in the last year. The sector is blaming chronic underfunding and rising costs. The National Day Nurseries Association said the data raised serious questions about whether there would be enough places to deliver the government's promised expansion of free childcare. In the year to the end of March, the number of nurseries fell from 27,291 to 26,884, with the overall number of places dropping by 3,512. When childminders were included, the overall number of childcare places fell by 24,521. In March's budget, the Chancellor announced the extension of the current scheme, offering some families in England 30 free hours of childcare per week for 3 to 4-year-olds to cover younger children. The change would be phased in from April next year. Nurseries say the amount of government payment does not cover costs, leading to closures for some businesses. A Department of Education spokesperson said that the picture was broadly positive, as the decrease in places was only 2% on last year, although it was recognised that there are some local challenges. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week I'm going to talk VPN. For those of you thinking, why is Steve talking about an underwear fashion faux pas? A VPN is a virtual private network, and knowing a little bit about them might make you realise you actually need one. What is it? Well, in a nutshell, a VPN changes how internet data is transmitted from a device. It allows the user to be more hidden. I know what you're thinking. I'm no cyber criminal. Why do I want to conceal my data? Well, let's look at 3 things a VPN can do for you. I'm going to use a phone as an example, but all of these can be applied to any device you can put on the internet. Do you use public networks? A public network may be the Wi-Fi on the bus or train, a local coffee shop or fast food restaurant, any connection that isn't your home. Transmitting data on these networks can potentially allow your data to be intercepted by third parties. Having a VPN allows you to encrypt your data from your device rather than depending on the network you're connecting to. So, when surfing the web while enjoying a burger and fries, you can be confident if you're being intercepted, the data will be useless to the interceptor. The next is shopping online. When connecting to an online shop, some stores use your location and unique device ID to target you. If you're returning to look at a product, the likelihood is you're going to buy it. Knowing this, some stores use clever algorithms to increase the price to maximize their profit. With a VPN, you can mask this data so the price you see is the initial price. The third is some streaming services are blocked by internet providers or unavailable from outside of certain countries. If you're using a VPN, you can choose where to set your location to allow you to see the content you wish to stream. I've not looked at individual providers. Some are free, some are paid for. If you're unsure, find a friend who's using one, ask them about it, and use the same one as them to begin with. Then you get free tech support. Make sure you know the terms of service. You don't want the VPN you're using keeping your data, as that would defeat the object in the first place. As always, don't forget to check out the TT Radio Twitter feed. Tell us what you want to know about tech. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
This programme has been brought to you by the Happy Confident Company. Our clinically approved, ready-to-go wellbeing and mental health programme will help your pupils thrive. In only 10 minutes a day, you'll be able to deliver social and emotional learning and wellbeing tools throughout your school. To find out more, visit us at www.happyconfident.com.
And we're talking a lot about this school culture, because culture is a huge element through expectations, through behaviour. What are some of these strategies you've employed to develop that culture within a school? Or maybe you've gone into headship or acting and your roles and you've seen actually there needs to be a big shift here. What are some of those practical things that you would suggest to other heads that say, okay, I've watched for 50 days. What can I start doing now to really change the culture? And it's not necessarily just pupils, it's the staff and it's the parents as well in that process as well. So what are your practical tips to create that positive culture?
I think the number one for me always is, and it's an overused phrase, and I'm trying to think of another way of saying it without using it because I don't like it. But I do think that there's a better way of saying it. I do think that everything is more powerful if it's co-developed. I was going to say buy-in, right? I don't think it's about buy-in at all. I think that's the wrong word. I think it's about spending the time at the beginning doing the really, really hard work of co-development. And people shy away from co-development I think for 2 main reasons, probably others, but for 2 main reasons. One is it's quicker to do it yourself. And sometimes you have a desired outcome in your head and you want to make sure that that desired outcome happens. And I think the second reason is co-development is quite uncomfortable often because it ultimately relies on a little bit of conflict and it has to be really carefully managed and about a really clear intent in the first place. And I'm not mad on this whole intent implementation impact thing that Ross said, but it is quite neat sometimes in terms of describing stuff. And I think regardless of what you're talking about, if you can co-develop the approach from the ground up, why we try to do it, and what is the why we're trying to do it and what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, then you can actually, it's miles more powerful spending that time at the beginning. I'm just thinking back to I think I've been in a leadership capacity or school improvement capacity. I think it's like 14, 15 schools now in some way, shape or form. And I think the last 7 maybe really tried to do really good co-development at the beginning. And sometimes we've got it right and sometimes we've got it less right. But I think really, really carefully trying to spend the time and do the hard yards at the beginning. And it is hard yards. And I've been in schools where it's been a really difficult process because people have either not wanted to do it in the first place or not seen the value of doing it or not liked the tension that comes from it of saying, well, why are you doing it like that? Why don't we do it like this? Why don't we do it like this? Why don't we do it like that? And actually, I think the most powerful ones I've ever been in are the ones where actually it's pretty much everybody, the whole staff doing it. If you've got time, my favorite example, I took over at what was Wilmslow Grange, now Hanforth Grange, which is a brilliant school and super staff team. And I remember being in a staff meeting really early on, and I'd said we're going to co-develop a teaching and learning policy right from the start. We're going to do the whole thing. We're going to write it. We did the 50 days. And I said at the end of it, I said, we don't really have an approach. We don't really have any commonality. It was a mixed age school. And I was really sort of morally bothered about the fact that a year one child in one classroom was being taught a completely different thing in a completely different way from a year one child in a different classroom. It was a bit like, we decide whether that child goes on that side of the wall or the other side of the wall. It's probably on us to make sure that they have a common experience between the two. And the staff, I think, well, they certainly came with me on the ride. I don't know how much they agreed or disagreed at the start. I think they sort of rolled their eyes and thought, oh, here we go. But they definitely came along with me on the ride. And I remember, I think we laid 10 staff meetings aside, and any new head, I would say that's a good way of doing it. Watch for 50 days and then grab the first 10 staff meetings after that 50 days, because you'll need the time to spend with people, because it'll take you a lot longer than you think it's going to learn. And if you can do it quickly, you're not done it properly. And then, so we had a staff meeting, and I think we started with maths. We did about 3 or 4 staff meetings on how we wanted to do maths, and everybody brought their ideas and we kicked them about. And we came and we literally went through every comma and every paragraph that we wrote together as a staff team. And we came up with an approach to maths. And then I think the next one was writing. There was writing. And we wanted to put a structure in place for writing, and it involved, I'd just been reading Bounds by Matthew Side and Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, and I'd sort of taught them through it. It was before the days of book clubs and all that stuff. And I sort of talked them through like what they said, and the idea of having inspiration at the start of an ignition opportunities at the start of learning. So we built this 3-week structure. We put ignition at the start of it. And then we wanted to have purpose. So we had beginning, middle and end days. And then we wanted to give context. So we had publishing days in it. Anyway, I said to the staff, right, we've got other days. What do we want to do on these other days? And somebody said, oh, we want to do editing on one day. And I thought, oh, I bet you do. But actually, it was one of the best lessons we did. And they said, oh, we want to teach the children to plan. Then I went, oh, right, okay. Well, yeah, that's an important skill. Okay, so next week we'll do a staff meeting on our planning lessons. How are we going to do planning lessons across the school? So I went away for a week, and I'm a big advocate of a guy that nobody remembers called Alan Peat. And Alan Peat's approach to writing, virtually all my success is based on Alan Peat's approach to writing. In fact, my whole life is pretty much based on the simplicity of Alan's approach to writing and everything else. So I had this big file, and I'd got it already, and Alan had this approach to planning, and I'd got that, and I'd got something else. I think I'd got some Pi Corbett stuff around, and I got that together. And I went into this staff meeting with these 2 big ring binders under my arms, and I plonked them down on the floor. I said, right, okay, we're going to do our approach to planning. So before we start, I just wanted to take you, and then this hand went up at the back of the room, and I went, just 1 second, I'm just going to take you through Alan Peat's approach to planning. And the hand stayed up. And I don't think she'll might be saying, there's a teacher who is still at Hanforth, Suzanne, and she said, we don't need this staff meeting. So I was like, oh, I thought we were doing planning. She's like, no, it's all right, we've decided. So I was like, oh, have we? She was like, yeah, no, we all got together this week because we know that you'd like to co-produce this stuff and we're allowed to make decisions. So we all got together this week and we decided we're going to use Sue Palmer. So I went, oh, well, I've got Alan Peat stuff. She went, no, you don't need to tell us about Alan Peat stuff because we're going to do Sue Palmer. It's like, who's Sue Palmer? So she goes in a cupboard in the classroom And she's got this massive big book, this Sue Palmer's big book, and it had loads and loads of different planning formats for different genres of writing. And I'll be honest, I looked at it and I thought, that's not Alan Peate's stuff. I want to do Alan Peate's stuff. And she sat there. She was near the back. She's great, Suzanne, and she's like really good with me as well, and she manages me really well. And she went, "Are we allowed to make decisions or not?" And it was one of those pivotal moments probably in my career. And I looked at her, and there was like about a 5-second pause while I thought, well, are they or not? Because I really want to do this Alan Peate stuff, but they really want to do this Sue Palmer stuff. And in the end, I went, all right, sweet, we'll do the Sue Palmer stuff. And we did it for 3 years, and the school was celebrated for writing and recognised for writing. And it was entirely based on Sue Palmer's planning documentation. And my Alan Peate folder went back in the cupboard and never came back out again. And then 3 years later, they developed a different way of doing it for neurodiverse children, which was to do with planning widgets, and they changed the whole structure to base it on that. And I think there's a really interesting lesson in that, isn't it? Is, are you really co-producing it, or really you're just steering it so they do the thing that you want to do? And it's really important if you can, and the decisions are sound, then it's really important that you give people the power to make good decisions. I
often relate it to being a conductor. You've got all your musicians, say you've got your first chair, a violin, you've got all of those, and it's that aspect. Okay, are you conducting, and which path are you taking them down? What genre are you going with that as well? Yeah. You brought up a thing about you're always going to have staff who may not be on board, and you may have to have those difficult conversations. And I think one of the things as a head, especially if you've been in education, you may not have had to have those difficult conversations. It links back to that quality assurance about holding people accountable. Have you had a difficult conversation with staff before who haven't bought in some ways to your way? And what tips would you give people as well? Because it is a hard job. It is a profession where hearts and souls are into it, compared to other professions. I make generalizations, but yeah, it's different than normal. Yeah, it does, and it has that. It's driven by that moral purpose, isn't it? And that's what makes it. I imagine health is. I don't know much about health, but I'm guessing health has some of the same challenges. Because it's driven by moral purpose and it's about children, then of course it's emotive, isn't it? And also, I think the really good part of it that we're losing is that actually it's quite an opinionated profession as well. And at its best, it's an opinionated profession. But I think we're losing that a little bit, although you wouldn't know that from Twitter sometimes. But I think, largely, I'm not sure that that's necessary. I do some work with with students as a UVT for Manchester Met. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily always the case anymore, which is a shame. Anyway, of course, you're going to have people that agree or disagree, and ultimately you're going to have people that that do it or don't do it. I do think that the biggest single powerful thing that you can always do, and the biggest single thing that works, is to be what and I do in the first place, and not like just the why of it, because the why is nice in it. But we're having a conference today across the trust, and Amjad Ali is speaking, and Amjad's just been relating a story saying, 10 years ago, all CPD was just like, we're doing it for the teacher, we're doing it for the children, we're doing it for the children, we're doing it for the children. And that led us down some difficult paths in terms of well-being and workload, because if you're doing it for the children, then you'll always do more. And how much as a profession, we probably now have to do it for ourselves as well as the children, or just do it for ourselves and the children will follow from that. So I think it's about transparency. So if you've got a good set of guiding principles in your head that you're working for, you can't have difficult conversations. I don't even like the phrase difficult conversations anyway, but if you can't have conversations unless you've been utterly transparent about those guiding principles. And I don't think you can have conversations based on those guiding principles until you've had lots and lots and lots of conversations about those guiding principles before it gets difficult, because it takes people time to learn stuff and change stuff and see the value of stuff. And sometimes what you're asking them to do doesn't work. And sometimes you have to change as well. So, and I think increasingly, within our trust and in my professional position, it's actually not
difficult conversations as in you have to do this. It's like difficult conversations as in this is what is expected of us. And I'll be honest, primarily by Ofsted. And if that's the case, how do we do that? And where it's not working, how do we help a bit more to make it work? How do we help a bit more to make it work? How do we help a bit more? How do we help a bit more? And then somewhere down the line, you hope it wouldn't, but somewhere down the line, you might end up in a situation of having to be like, look, we tried so much here and it's still not working. You know, I mean, what is it that's getting in the way of that? And that becomes quite difficult. So I don't think I really buy into so much that difficult conversation idea of you're supposed to be doing this and you're not doing it. Why are you not doing it? Because I don't think really that's what drives people primarily. I think 90% of the time it's because people actually don't know why or what they're supposed to be doing. And that's primarily on you, not on them. Because you're not being transparent enough. And if I might digress, this is Ofsted all over, isn't it? Like the fact that there are training materials for HMIs and Ofsted for additional inspectors that we can't see is ridiculous. And the fact that there is a set of expectations wrapped up in the EIF, which feels like only a certain few or only only an experienced, cadre of the profession understand how to interpret that. That's ridiculous. Because every new head teacher, for me, and if there is a change of government, I would hope that they would try to address this in some way, shape or form, is every new head teacher should go into a school, every senior leader should go into a school, every teacher that works in a school should know what the expectation is, not be being judged based on things that they can't see, because that's not subjective for me. I know they would say that the EIF is subjective, and I get it, it is, but it's not being interpreted in a subjective way. It's being interpreted too often in an objective way. And that's what leads to sometimes, variability between inspections and variability between schools and inspection results. So I think as senior leaders, as head teachers, as trust leaders, we have to be utterly transparent about what we're expecting and why we're doing it and what we're expecting to be done. And then we have to expect it to not go well for a long period of time before we get anywhere near some difficult conversations.
And the thing is that clarity of your communication, a lot of things fail because you don't communicate it in the clearest possible way, or even you yourself don't know what those guiding principles are. Yeah. And I think there can be overcomplicatedness with the communication. You can give too much details, so it's drip feeding it. And I think we do all this research about how we teach children. Do we actually do the same for our professional development? Is it a rounded approach as well? And I think that's a core element as well. You brought up well-being earlier, and I think that's a really key bit at the moment. Heads often, it can be seen quite as a lonely job. It's somewhere where you are at the top of that school. You've got a lot of things on your plate. You're trying to balance people's emotions with the budget and with new things coming in. What are your tips for heads? You gave about productivity earlier, and that came up in my MBQH the other week. Someone's like, we don't want to know, how do you organise your days? What's the best way? What have you found? What planner have you found? And all of that kind of thing. But what are your some other tips to help with that well-being element? Yeah,
I think for me, and it comes back to that thing at the beginning about leadership structures, and it comes back to I'm a bit of a structure obsessive, and I think so much of it does come back to that, because actually, in a hierarchy, it is an incredibly lonely job. And for me, the best way to deal with that is to get rid of the hierarchy. So as much as possible, to build a leadership team around yourself as a head teacher that is diverse and wide as you possibly can get it, because that will be your support network. And that's the same at trust level as well. And I'm really lucky. I took over in September. There was... the former CEO had basically organised it so that it was the central team was ready to grow. And I was able to bring on two fantastic deputy CEOs. I've got Chris Dyson, who came from Parklands and largely brings a wealth of education experience. And then a deputy CEO called Kiran Bithal, who came over he was on secondment to the trust as a COO a little while back, but from the Department for Education. And their roles overlap quite strongly, but largely Kieran more works with the central team and Chris more works on the educational side, but they overlap and work really well together. And that's really important for me and my well-being, because I suppose being a CEO could probably be an incredibly lonely job, but it's not, because I've got my team around me, and my central team are absolutely fantastic. And we spend a lot of time working on those relationships and making sure that we spend time together. And I think that's the same in schools, isn't it? Is too often the head teacher's door is closed, or it's an intimidating door to open, and the head teacher doesn't want to put on other people and therefore does a lot themselves, when actually other people are, in my experience, are really happy to help and want to be brought into the process and want to feel part of a team. And actually you can build a really wide, diverse leadership team, and that helps your well-being as much as it helps their well-being and their careers as well. So it's a sort of positive two-way relationship. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing, I'll be honest, I didn't know anything about until I started at Create, but has come from Chris, which is the amount of network groups that there are out there. I had no idea that these network groups existed, and you'll know the names of some of them better than I, but there's like Heads Rest, and there's head teacher support groups, and some fantastic networking organisations that work in various different ways. Some of them work virtually, and some of them they meet up and go on like sort of weekend things, and I think that is a really positive development, probably come from COVID, but a really positive development for the profession, that there are those support networks out there. And that didn't exist when I first started headship. And to be honest, I didn't know about it until about 6 months ago. So I think I would definitely urge any head teacher to be part of that. And the other thing, I think, being a head teacher, especially when you start off, you almost feel like you have to be given permission to do stuff. And sometimes you get a really good mentor from the local authority, or from a trust, or from a mentor from somewhere, and they push you out of your comfort zone and get you involved in other stuff. And that other stuff that you get involved in is often the stuff that helps with your well-being. So I've been really fortunate in my career that people have, sort of bent me ear and said, "Oh, come and give us Amber this." And I remember there's a guy called Andy Hodgkinson who's now one of the people running some of the programs out at the Institute of Education at UCL. And he grabbed me really early on in my career. He's a head in Cheshire East, where he used to work. And he grabbed me really early on, and he was like, "Oh, I've got this project called the Emotionally Healthy Schools Project, and I think there's a few of us in it. And why don't you come down and sit in one of the meetings?" And it was brilliant. It was like, we did some really good work. We raised some good money. We had a really positive impact on children across Cheshire East, on their mental health and well-being. But I think it was better than that, because it had a really positive impact on me. And actually, I don't think my school got a huge amount out of it, to be honest, but I got an enormous amount out of it, because I got time to spend thinking about doing other things, and I met some really cool people, and some cool things came out of it tangentially later on. And I would urge any new head teacher not to be too scared to jump in with both feet. And Andy, funnily enough, I've seen him again recently, and he says he's now working with CEOs primarily as part of the Institute. And he said, "How often do CEOs ask for permission to do things?" And he said the whole point of being a CEO is that you don't ask for permission. The title in itself is permission to go and knock on the door of the CEO of Tesco's, or to go and knock on the door of the CEO of Iceland, or to go and knock on the door of the MP and demand their time. And I think in education, I don't think we're very good at that until we've been doing it a long time. And I think I would urge anybody that's new to just, what's the worst that can happen? They can say no. And I'm learning that every day from Chris, particularly, who's absolutely brilliant at knocking on people's doors and asking them for things. And 9 times out of 10, people want to help, and they want you to be involved. So I would, I know it's a scary thing to do, to inject yourself into a situation, but I would urge people to try and do that.
That's really good. I think I've got one more question to kind of summarize up what we said. Would you recommend being a head to anyone?
Oh,
why?
Absolutely.
Why?
In a heartbeat. It's the best job in the world. It's genuinely the best job in the world. I think, and I'll caveat this in a minute, because it's also the loneliest, and it's also the hardest, and it's also the most awful. And I get all that too. And I'm not saying that just blithely at all. But I think two things. I think, was it Winston Churchill? I don't know if this quote is true, but I like to think it's true, even if it's not true. I think it was Winston Churchill said that the Prime Minister's not yet been imbued with the power of the head teacher of a local authority primary school or something like that. And the two most powerful positions, I don't know if any of this is true, but I always think it's true. But the two most powerful positions in the civil service are the captain of a nuclear-powered submarine and the head teacher of a local primary school. I don't know if that's true either, but I think it is. I remember there was a woman called Liz Wolverson who was absolutely amazing, who was she was the director of education, I think, or assistant director of education for the London Diocesan Board for Schools. So she ran about 190 schools in the capital. They were all incredibly high performing. And I remember her saying to me once, she said, and I'm not going to do an impression, but she basically said, I said something, and she said, never forget, Mark, that the entire power of the crown delegated through the Secretary of State and on appointment by the governing body to the head teacher to use entirely as he or she sees fit. And I was a bit like, I sat there, she said it like really quickly. And I was like, I sat there, took it in for a minute, and it was like, wow, yeah, that's that. I mean, with great power comes great responsibility, but equally, wow, what a privilege to have that amount of responsibility and that ability to make such a change in society. And I think that, for me, that's one of the reasons it's one of the most amazing jobs in the world, because there aren't that many that are like it, I don't think. And so that's the first reason. The second reason, and having had a perspective outside education, and I do, I'm still interested in business, but I think ultimately when I got home at the end of the day, having traded electronics or whatever, there was no end product. There was just money. And money's great, and people are shouting probably at the podcast going, I want more money. And sure, we all want more money. But money, after about 15 years, you realise that that's a bit empty. And it's great, and it buys you a nice lifestyle and all the rest of it. But if you can earn a good wage, and I think, notwithstanding the current industrial action, which is absolutely correct, that notwithstanding that, and I think, the very, very, very strong case that the wages need to increase over time as well, not just this year or next year, but on a continuing path to bring them back to where they were 10 years ago. But notwithstanding that, it's a profession where you can be, paid at the level that you're paid at, that you can have the status in society that you can have. And I know that goes up and down, and we're not necessarily seen by society always in a positive light, but let's hope that's on a positive trajectory over the next 10 years. Especially as a change of government. But I think the most important thing is if you can have, pay, status, but you can also have moral purpose. And at the end of the day, you're doing good for society. That in itself is worth something. And I think having done both, it's definitely better to have moral purpose, and it's definitely better to have an end product at the end of it. And if that end product is better children or better prepared children or children with happier lives, then that is worth something. And I suppose that's why I would say it is the best job in the world. Or, for sure, it's also super, super difficult, and it's getting more and more difficult by the day. And we need to do something about that, because otherwise it'll be unsustainable and people won't want to do it, and they won't understand how brilliant it is.
Thank you. I think it's been a fascinating conversation. I know I've learned a lot, and look forward to seeing what you continue to do in your rich and varied career to date, Mark. So thank you very much for coming on.
And now with us, we've got Emily. Now, I know earlier she tweeted, there's a little bit way back now, that what an amazing school, brilliant team, fantastic children and family, and the supportive community. She couldn't be prouder of her school. But before we go into that, how are you this evening, Emily?
I'm good. Thank you so much for your patience this evening while I dealt with all my technical difficulties.
Oh, don't worry. I work with tech all day, in and out, and I still hate using it at different times. So don't worry. I know how you feel with that. Before we go into your school's journey, because I think a lot of this is about you as a person, as a leader, I kind of want to ask you this question, and I've stolen this question of Diary of a CEO. It said, what's your purpose? What inspired you to work in education?
Right. So I have been primary head. I'm a primary head teacher of primary school in Morton on the Wirral. Absolutely love it. One form entry primary school, community primary school. I've been in education now for 20 years. I've been a leader for 10 years. In my current school, I've been in there for 6 years. Absolutely love it. Passionate about early years. I used to be an early years advisory and consultant. Absolutely love that. Passion for SEND and inclusion, school improvement, curriculum. It started off, funnily enough, I wanted to be an air hostess. But I'm really sure anyone who's met me realizes when I take my heels off, I am tiny. So there is no way I could have been an air hostess. So I went abroad, worked abroad because I love travel. I decided to be a children's rep, came home after a couple of gap years thinking I'll put off university for a little bit longer. Didn't want to do it forever, and decided then to go to university. I actually wanted to be a secondary school English teacher. So I went off to do an English degree. But soon decided that I wanted to work with primary school. I wanted to make a difference. Any work that I was doing, I loved holidays and I loved working abroad and I loved being with the children. But knowing that you're making a difference, I think that's what you go into this job for. And I think when I'd been in teaching for a while, I got really interested in school development. I worked with students. I was a student mentor. I loved seeing their journey. I loved helping them develop and flourish. Then I started working with NQTs and started to help develop them in the rural partnership and beyond that. And then I started doing the advisory role with early years. I've always loved investing in people and seeing them flourish. And that's something that I'm still very, very passionate about now, is investing in the future of education and working with my staff, seeing them flourish, seeing the children in school thriving, and also supporting our families and communities.
So let's go back to your headship when you first came on. What were some of those key challenges then that when you first came in, and how did you deal with them? Did you have to sit back, watch, listen, or were there things straight away you were like, no, right, we're going to change this to try and help move that school forward?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one. I was speaking to my leadership team about this afternoon because you go in to a school with an agenda, and I'd been head of school and I'd been acting head teacher in other schools before I got this post. And I'd always said, I'm going to sit back, I'm going to relax, I'm going to reflect, I'm going to listen, I'm going to take it all in. Had an amazing 2 inset days where I introduced myself, set my stall out basically saying that I'm reflective, I'm open, I'm authentic, I'm transparent, I'm here to listen. We know that you've got to build that trust, build that credibility, get the acceptance of your team, get the acceptance of your staff, get everyone on board, get everyone kind of buying into your vision. And that does take a while. So my vision was for my first 100 days really to sit back and let people get to love me and, build that trust and build those relationships, get that sense of belonging. I had lovely 2 inset days, inset in the morning, really kind of like reviving everyone and sharing this vision that we're in it for the children. And then the afternoon sessions, I had open door sessions and just said, I'm in my office. If you want to book in a time slot to speak more privately with me, you can do. Or if you just want to pop in, there's tea and biscuits, and just pop in and let's just have a chat. And it was wonderful. Lots of staff came in and said, I'm really settled here. I don't like change. I'm really nervous. People were really honest with me. Some people came in and said, I don't want you to change anything. Some people came in and said, I'm worried about this. How's this going to look? And I said at the time, I can't give you any answers. It's going to develop together. It's going to be really fluid. Then the children came in the next day and I looked out onto the playground and the gates were open from 7:30. And to me, it just felt like, oh my goodness, okay, I need to establish a bit of safeguarding procedures, a bit of, I have to gain control of this. So the idea is that you don't want to step in too soon, but in terms of the statutory things and making sure that things are in place and children are safe and you feel content, I do think that there is some things when you go in as a new head that you do have to have an understanding of. I think safeguarding is a main one, to make sure that you're happy with the policies and procedures and that everything is in place. And, my first thought then was, let's get to that single central record. Let's make sure that everything in terms of statutory, the website and all those statutory things were all in place. So I felt a bit more secure, so I could sit back and look and learn. But I still think that is really, really important. I think actively working on building relationships, being visible in those first 100 days, being out in the community, finding out what's happening, working with the families, building the trust up of our families, working with the children, being visible on the gates in the morning to meet and greet, being on hand if staff need to speak to you. It is exhausting at first because you make yourself so available to everybody. But I think it's really important to get to know everyone when you first start. Lots of observing, lots of just sitting back and taking it all in, lots of listening, lots of active listening, really getting to the crux of kind of how the school works, how everyone feels, asking lots of questions, having that curiosity, like I wonder why, I wonder if. I'm a big one for journaling, so I kept a reflective journal all the way through. So just looking back on that now and just reading through, and a lot of pages were just like lists and lists of questions of things that I was like, what is this? Need to find out more about this. And how do I approach this? And having that in my head was really key. When I work with new heads now, I often say to them, go in and be curious. Don't be judgmental. Leave your baggage at the door. It's really important that you don't go in and take over. And I say this now as a head who've been there for 6 years. If somebody came into my school now with me being head for 6 years, they would find fault immediately. No one is perfect. You always have things to do on your to-do list. I know that somebody would come in and take over from me as a new head and be quite judgmental and, oh, this hasn't happened, or this isn't my way. So I think you have to go in, leave your baggage at the door, be curious, but don't be judgmental. Don't be looking to blame if things aren't in place. If standards aren't great, I took over a school and there was a 3-year decline of our statutory data. So it did make me concerned when I took over, and I knew that there was some work to do around embedding knowledge-rich curriculum. There were things that we needed to work on, but it wasn't going in as a judgment. It wasn't going in as a blame game. It was going in and getting everyone's buy-in so we could start looking at real quality school improvement.
It's fascinating, and a lot of those things you've said about the safeguarding, and it's almost setting up those foundations so you can get that buy-in. So one of the things I want to dive a little bit deeper into is, how did you establish that vision? How did you get the buy-in, and how did you get everyone almost to change their behaviours towards the safeguarding, but also towards that vision you had for your school in those early days of your headship?
I think the key thing is always bringing it back to the children. I think anyone who goes into education, anyone working in education, has the child at heart. So I think as long as you keep bringing your vision back to, it's for the children, it's for the best for our children, it's for the best for our community, it's for the best for our school, and being quite transparent with the decisions that you're making, and having those open conversations and those dialogues. I've got a new deputy head more recently, and in our first SLT meeting, he said, it's refreshing that you come to a meeting and you haven't got the answers. That's refreshing. And I said, that's good leadership because it should be a consultation. You should be consulting with everyone that you work with. And I think that is key. When you have your vision, you share that vision, you share your rationale, you talk to people about the why you're doing things, and pulling it back to the why we do really helps people drive it forward together. If they kind of get on board and they can see the value of what we're doing, it makes it so much easier to drive it forward together. A lot of work with the staff, like I say, having an open door policy, having open, honest and transparent conversations with staff. Some of them were quite uncomfortable. Staff were brutally honest with me at the beginning and families were as well. But that's what I asked for. I think it's really, really important that we don't have our guards up, we don't have our barriers up, that we are reflective as practitioners as well, that we don't have all the answers and we need to listen to people. I said to one of the parents when I started, this is your school. At the moment, I am a guest in your school. I'm getting to learn about your community. I'm getting to know about your children. I'm getting to know about the families. It's an absolute privilege and it's an honour. But while I'm learning, please be patient with me. And showing that humility to families really put them on the back foot and made them feel like, oh, okay, right, let's give her a chance. And when they see that the children are thriving and the children are loving school, they think, well, let's make this something to celebrate. And we were laughing again this afternoon, talking about, it was in the March time, we had an Easter celebration. We went down to church and I stepped out of church, got all the school settled, and we got the children up on stage ready to perform. I stepped outside of church just to check that everyone had come in, and was about to close the doors before we started. And one of the grandparents was outside on the stairs, and she came over and said, "Iya, are you the head teacher?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." She said, "Yeah. Do you know what? I get it." And I was like, "Get what?" "It's like when you started, miss. We all hated you." I was like, "I'm really sorry. I had no idea you hated me." But that's a good thing. I always say, if you're doing your job well, you're not going to be popular all the time. But I think then, reflecting on that, it was about speaking with parents and finding out from them. So we set up parent class reps after that. So we had parents vote for a representative from their year group who would meet with me every half term. And it'd just be quite informal, just a coffee and a chat. But I would say to them, you have to tell me something positive. We always start with something positive, something that's going well, and then something specifically from your year group that you would like to see improved in school. And it was a way of building up those relationships, having those key people who could talk to me in school and I could bounce ideas off them. We have terrible curtains in school, I'm not going to lie. I always tell this story about the school hall curtains. They are bright red and they've got knights on horseback, and they're bonkers. The curtains are bonkers, and they don't match with our kind of like low stimulus, low arousal, beautiful, neutral school. But the curtains have a value. One of the parents said in that meeting, "You can change anything you want, miss. Don't change the uniform. Don't change the curtains." And I was like, the curtains, how bizarre. These red, crazy, bonkers curtains. She didn't want them changing. But the school's over 80 years old. And in years gone by, the parents and grandparents all had their class photos in front of these curtains on the stage. So in their houses, they have, generational photographs of their school photos in front of the curtains. And it's a silly thing, but it always makes me think back to the things that matter to our families and our communities make a difference. And it made a difference to them to feel heard and feel listened to and valued. That, yeah, I didn't change the curtains. I had to have them fireproofed. It cost about £2,000. But the curtains are still there.
I have to admit, that was one of the first things I heard. When you talk about the curtains, it was like, it just made me go back to my school uniform as a primary school. I was yellow polos and brown jumpers, which is the worst uniform ever. And it's amazing to see what's that the parents associate with your school. And because you're coming from an education point of view, you're coming from within the school, or if you're new to the school as a head, you're coming with a different perspective as well. You don't sometimes realize all of these different perceptions and what they think as well. And that making sure you're actively learning and listening is really important. So you're listening to everyone and bringing them on your journey and making those sacrifices, like, okay, we'll keep the curtains, let's get them right, but we'll do X, Y, and Z. Go back to your principles of what it works. I want to go back to this one thing about any regrets. Have you got any regrets in your first kind of year or so as a head, or things that didn't work? And then what did you do about it? And how did you make sure you were self-aware of that situation as well?
Yeah. I think it's about choosing your battles to begin with, because things are a battle when you're new, when you're introducing change. Change can make people feel quite anxious. It can make staff feel quite anxious. It can make parents feel quite anxious. They're quite wary anyway. They don't know you. Who are you? You're coming into their school. You're coming in with all your newfangled ideas, trying to change things. So change can be quite overwhelming and quite daunting for people. So I think it is, I always say choose your battles, because I went in and was like, standards are low, standards need to be addressed. We're raising the bar here, expectations, children being in school, attendance, punctuality, uniform. So I thought uniform was a great place to start. Let's get the children smart and meaning business. Let's get some routines established, sent out a newsletter. after meeting with the parent class rep, saying, we're not going to change the school uniform, but there is a uniform, and we do expect, we have high expectations and high standards for our children, and we expect them to be well presented when they come to school. No trainers, full uniform, no jewellery, girls to have their hair tied back neatly, and boys to have sensible haircuts. Well, that was one of the worst things that I ever put in a newsletter. Because it was then a battle. It was like, oh, right, okay, fair enough. We'll send them in uniform, but the boys are all going to have hair bubbles in. It's like, how can you misread that? Okay, I get it. It was girls must have their hair tied back. Why do girls just have their hair tied back? Boys can have their hair tied back if they want to. And it was one of those things where you go, oh my goodness, it's such a small thing, but there were so many parent complaints about that. And it was short-sighted, but it wasn't about that. It was about being told what to do and being fearful of change. But having that difficult conversation then with parents and them sending the boys in with like little tiny bobbles all around the front of their hair, and the boys being embarrassed but like not wanting to lose face, and the parents not wanting to lose face, no one wanting to back down. So in the end, we just had like a crazy hair day, and I was like, do you know what, I'm just going to embrace this. I'm going to come in with crazy hair, I'm going to turn it into a bit of a joke, and let's just get over this. But sometimes it is, going in with the right things at the right time, sharing the rationale and how you communicate it as well. I think for our parents to see that on a newsletter, it felt like I was judging them for for their uniform standards and other things, and they did take it quite personally. So I do say prioritize, choose your battles, and listen to the families, be open with them, be available, listen to feedback, be able to be reflective, have conversations with them. But it is also seeing the humour. I think a lot of what I do is based on humour. We use the PACE approach in school by Dan Hughes, and it always starts with playful. So it's playful acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. And that's our behaviour approach in school, that we always approach it with that playful approach when children are regulated, then that acceptance, the curiosity and empathy. But it's also how we treat each other and treat our families, that we are playful, we're lighthearted, like it's okay, we'll make a bit of a joke about it, and I let them know I can laugh at myself as well. I did put that about hair, and then I came in the next day and we didn't have sensible hair, and we all had crazy hair, and we all had a good laugh. And just for them to see the human in you and see that you're authentic as well, I think that did really help. So yeah, I think that was the one of the things that I learned was learn to laugh at yourself, reflect on decisions that you've made. If you have made mistakes, always apologise. That always takes people off guard. And when parents come in and they're absolutely furious, sometimes I say, look, it's my responsibility. I'm head teacher of this school. I'm sorry that that's happened. I'm sorry that you're upset. You shouldn't come into school. You entrust us with your children. You shouldn't be afraid. You shouldn't be worried. You shouldn't be anxious. It is our responsibility. And apologise, because you're not above apologising. You don't have all the answers.
And I think that's something you've got to be confident in yourself as well, don't you? You've got to be really self-aware that you're trying to do the best for your children, but also bringing those parents in sometimes will solve 9 out of 10 issues. There's a lot of keyboard warriors out there, especially in this age of social media. Yeah. But if you bring them in, and there's a lot of them just miscommunication. They just got the wrong end stick. And yes, you may have made mistakes, but actually working on it together is something that is a collaboration. School is a community at the end of the day. Yeah. And I think with COVID, we've realised actually the school isn't just 4 walls, it's everyone involved, and we're bringing parents back in, we're having that. And people are scared of change. And we've always got to be changed. It doesn't matter if we are doing really well in our results, something's going to change. The world evolves, we find new things. Let's make sure that we do evolve with it. But it goes back to those principles, as you were alluding to. Listen to everything and see where you can go with that. Kind of want to go back into your point that you said about buy-in. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the tangible things you've done to try and get staff buy-in? So safeguarding, yes, you've got to follow the letter of the law with things like that. But in terms of curriculum, or in terms of schemes and other bits and pieces, how do you get staff to feel like they've got ownership of it and it's not it's something done with them rather than done to them as a head?
Yeah, I think my go-to phrase is always let the teachers teach. My job is to set the expectations, to share the vision, to offer them high quality CPD, to develop them, to be a learning school. I often say to give them the wings and let them fly, be an excellent role model, leading by example, but being sensible as well with workload, being nurturing, making school a safe place, psychologically safe and a physically safe place for everyone, including my staff. I want my staff to feel listened to. We have a coaching culture at school. So it's kind of non-judgmental. There's no kind of like formal lesson observations, book scrutinies, learning walks. I want to value my staff. I always say, I've appointed you, you've been to university, you've studied, you've got your degree, you've been through the hoops. I have to allow you to teach. I have to make the ground ready for you to grow, basically. I have to put everything in place so you can do what you're employed to do. So there is a real focus on being sensible around workload, developing a very nurturing culture for our staff. We don't have marking, we take PPA at home. I say that my staff have earned autonomy. Everyone has autonomy. They're trusted to do their jobs. But obviously that has to be earned. If there is a concern, sometimes we may have to step in and give them a bit more scaffolding until they can, just rise ahead with their autonomy. A lot of the things that we do around kind of well-being and workload, it's not tokenistic. It's not kind of full fat Friday, cakes in the staff room, everyone pile in. It's not one-offs. It's around a culture of having those clear expectations, letting them know that they're invested in, letting them know that they're valued, and offering that high quality CPD, that bespoke CPD, that it's not performance management. We don't manage people's performance. We help people to develop. We do that through coaching. We have performance development plans. We have a staff CPD library in my office. We model that through good, we are good role models for that as leaders. I'm working my way very slowly, I have to say, through my masters, but always learning together, learning with the children, learning from each other, peer-to-peer support. Developing future leaders as well. And I always say not to be selfish with my staff. I love to hang on to my staff. We invest a lot in them, a lot of high quality CPD, lots of opportunities through the partnership work that we do through Liverpool Hope University, ADHD Foundation, Early Excellence in Huddersfield. We get lots of opportunities for our staff to have these opportunities, do their MPQs. 2 of our teaching assistants have done their degrees. So it's giving people an opportunity to grow. But with that, you give them the wings and they fly. So just last year, we lost 4 members of staff. One went off to work in a consultancy role for the local authority. Another one went off to School Improvement Liverpool to work as an early years consultant. And 2 more went on to deputy headship. So you do give your staff the wings to fly. But as a leader, you think about the greater good, you think about sharing that good practice beyond your school. So I think when staff can see that and they can see that they're valued, they can see that they have opportunities. Every year we offer between 2 and 3 TLR3 projects, which are time-limited projects linked to the school development plan. And obviously you get paid for doing the additional work. It gives people a taster of leadership, and then some people have used that and gone on to leadership roles within other schools and different opportunities. But some people do it and say, it's lovely to have that experience and that little bit of extra money this year for the work and recognition of the work that I've done, but that's not something that I want to do moving forward. So it is really about believing in your staff, allowing them to do their job, let the teachers teach, and just providing a psychologically safe and an environment where people can thrive.
Can you build on this idea of coaching? So a lot of schools have taken up coaching, and you were talking about the idea of allowing your teachers to thrive, and I think that's a really key bit. But how have you interweaved coaching with like staff meetings and professional development as a whole school to make sure that you don't focus on too many different things, and you're working on the specific things that will make a difference. Because I work across a lot of schools in our trust, and I talk to a lot of schools in my other roles and bits and pieces. And traditionally, professional development is, oh, we do a bit of this or we do a bit of that. And it's almost going back to the old units that we used to do in maths and the numeracy strategy. And we don't do anything in depth. And I think from my experience, that's where you can't get long lasting change. You don't get teachers owning it. You don't get that, okay, let's play with what does this look like in my school. I can't actually take it on and suggest changes to make sure it works as well. So how does that coaching and professional development look in your school, and what benefits have you seen from it as well?
Yeah, I think everything comes back to that, the school development planning. I think stripping it right back, looking at the performance indicators. What is everything telling us? What is the data telling us? Hard data, soft data, feedback from children, feedback from families, feedback from staff. How are we using those performance indicators then to make an accurate self-assessment of our school? Like, where are we currently? Let's evaluate where we are currently, and let's plan for what we're going to really focus on next year. And I completely agree with you. If you do too much, you don't do enough well. There is a possibility of saying everything's a priority. If everything's a priority, nothing becomes a priority. So looking at the school development plan and stripping it back, I work quite heavily on just a rule of three, just three things to remember during this meeting, 3 things to focus on in this lesson, 3 things to really focus on in terms of school development. And then people aren't overwhelmed. And the main priority, the number one priority out of the 3 things that's on the school development plan is going to be everyone's priority. So in your school development, their personal development plan, everyone has the same priority, number 1, and that helps us to really drive forward standards and really unpick what success looks like if we all do this, and everyone plays the part in leading one area in school. So this year, for example, it's been reading, and everyone had a part to play within that. Even the finance officer, the school caretaker, everyone had a role to play within raising the profile of reading and in improving the outcomes for reading across school. And though when you really, really focus and you're doing something and everyone understands the rationale and you get the buy-in from all of your staff and they can see the progress, and it's broken down into small manageable chunks, and it's, you build in reflection time within that, it doesn't become tokenistic. It's not like a staff meeting for staff meeting's sake. Everyone can see how that leads into the whole school development planning. And I think that's where coaching's helped. I started being coached around 8 years ago. I'm really, really passionate about coaching. I think it develops so many other skills, about being reflective, asking questions. I'm a firm believer on not rescuing people. And when we first introduced coaching, that was the first thing that we did was, as leaders, we will not rescue you anymore. I know it seems really, really cruel, but if we tell you what to do, you'll do it. And if it doesn't go well, you can come back and say, well, I did what you told me to do. It didn't go well. I'm not taking any ownership of it. It's all on you. Whereas if people are coached into coming up with their own ideas and their own solutions, and they have ownership over things, they're more likely to put those things into place. So the coaching culture started with leadership, really, that came from a passion that I had around coaching and being coached. Then our leadership team and how we worked in developing our teams, so that it wasn't, oh, everyone comes to me and everyone wants an answer. No, everyone comes to me, which is great, and we can talk things through. But do you know what? We're going to train more of us who are able to facilitate, who are able to offer people, opportunities to discuss and be heard and work through and become their own problem solvers, so that they feel empowered to do their jobs. Because if they're feeling that, oh, I'll need to check with Emily, or I'll need to check with a member of SLT, it's quite demoralizing not being able to make your own decisions. So coaching is really, really powerful for that. I know it's really features heavily in the new ECT model, and that's been brilliant to see. And then through the MPQSLs that my leadership team have been having, my middle leaders, it helps them to see the purpose of coaching and how that really helps to drive standards forward and empowers you to make those decisions. It's helped within the classroom as well, because with coaching, you develop your listening skills, reducing the cognitive load, listening, asking purposeful questions. I often say that coaching is just a conversation with a purpose. Like, that's okay. I'm here to listen. You talk, I'll listen. We can work through it together, and then we'll meet up again. So it is more about a culture rather than a tokenistic. And I know when new staff joined me, they said, "Oh, I did this in my last school. We had somebody in, they did a staff meeting, and it never really took off." And I can get that, because if it wasn't done in terms of a coaching culture, if it was something that was done to them, you don't get the buy-in from your staff.
And I wrote 2 words down: being self-aware and then empowering others. And I think that kind of sums up what you were saying at that point. And I think it's a common theme. And it's a lot of it is, I find pride of seeing others thrive on something you've instigated or you've given them, and they're confident, or if they get something wrong, they know actually what to do about it as well. And I think that, for me as a leader, is a thing that I thrive off, rather than, oh, here, I've got to do everything because I know best, or I could do it quicker. It's actually giving that power to others and seeing their potential, or giving them time to see that potential as well. I want to go back to one tangible thing. And I think as a NQT, as we were, but now ECTs, you often have that first teaching day, and you live that over in your head. What's my first day going to be? And you think about it, you have sleepless nights about it. So as a head, what would you do on your first TED day? What's your first message you would give to staff?
As a first head?
Yeah.
I think giving staff so much of you, letting them know you as a real person. I'm not a figurehead. I'm not the expert. I'm the leader of a school. I'm not a manager. I'm not here to manage you. I'm here to lead and develop you. I'm authentic. I'm real. I'll listen. And I think that being personable and not trying to pretend to be someone else, because people can see through that straight away, but have that reflection time on your own to realize, who am I as a leader? What kind of leader am I? What is my vision? What is my value? What are my key principles? What is my why? What's my driver? If you know that and you have confidence in that, it shines out of you. It's who you are. Another key phrase that my staff will know that I use all the time is, you make the weather. And more recently, when I've been coached more recently, my coach says it to me all the time as well. It's that you make the weather. If you go in and you're stormy and there's a storm cloud around you, I know that spreads. My staff then see me in the corridor, and they're like in corridors saying, "Oh my goodness, have you seen Emily today? She's really grumpy. Do you think it's something I've done?" Blah, blah, blah. They go in the classroom, they're on edge. That makes them nervous around the children. The children pick up on that. Then the children go home. They've had a bad day. Then the parents. It's that you can make that. That is one person. You do make the weather. If you go in and you're uplifting and you're empowering and you're listening and you're positive, that spreads like wildfire, and it is beautiful to see. So always remembering your why, your drivers, being authentic, and just remembering you do make the weather.
I'm just nodding along here. It's brilliant to hear from you. So my penultimate question then, what's that one piece of advice you would give a new head? Enjoy
every minute. I know it's a bit cliche, but I genuinely believe it is the best job in the world. And keep children at heart. If I have a bad day and I'm in the office and I've back-to-back meetings, I've had a parent complaint on the phone, I've got some difficult paperwork that I need to deal with for the local authority, or something else is happening, get out there, be with the children, remind yourself of the why. The children are at the heart of everything we do, and they should be at the heart of everything we do. That is our core purpose. So be around the children, enjoy every minute. It's such a privilege to lead a school.
And so I think I know the answer to this final question I was going to ask you, but in this world that we live in at this moment in time, would you recommend being a head?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love every minute, even the difficult times. It's an honour to do it. It's an absolute privilege to know that you're making a difference to children's lives, that you're developing your staff. I sit in governors' meetings and watch my staff present to my governors. I feel like I'm going to cry, like a proud mum, like, oh, my babies, look at them. I'm so proud of them. It's like when you watch the Leavers Assembly and you watch the children perform, you see your children thriving. Just last year, we got 5 of our parents into work, and we gave them those opportunities of qualifications, gave them the confidence. I gave some of them references to apply for primary school jobs, support staff jobs in primary schools. To know that you are making a difference in people's lives is just beautiful, and you don't get that anywhere else. To go from 1 minute to a really serious meeting to then playing with a rabbit and watching chicks hatch, It just doesn't happen everywhere. It's a beautiful job and an absolute privilege.
I have to say thank you very much. And there's no question why you've been awarded or shortlisted on the TS School Awards. And I really look forward to following you on Twitter and your journeys that you are going through as a leader, and really recommend just following Emily on Twitter. So thank you very much for coming along. Really lovely to hear from you and Mark earlier in the show. And in a world where there is a lot of things about teaching at the moment and opinions from different areas, it's really lovely to hear the positive messages that both Mark and Emily are sharing, that actually teaching and headship in itself is a privilege, and children are at the heart of that. So thank you once again for coming and listening to Teacher Talk Radio. Please follow along and listen to more of our shows. Thank you and good night.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.